Welcome in today. I have Lady Colin Campbell back, and we're going to do something a little different this time. We're going to talk about Lady C herself, because she has had such an amazing life, and her autobiography, A Life Worth Living, says it all. It's an amazing book filled with inspiration, heartache, ups and downs. I can't believe you've packed so much into your life so far, Lady C, but welcome. Thank you again for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. And I'm glad you've enjoyed the book.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of torn because I've had to go through it a couple times because there's so much in there. It's amazing. Let's start with, I know your viewers for your YouTube channel are very interested in your life, and this covers it all. I want to just try and get through this a little bit chronologically if we can. So you were born in Jamaica with a genital birth defect. And I have known people that has had the same defect as that. But you were raised as George Ziotti. Your parents wanted to raise you as a boy instead of a girl, but you knew you were a girl.
Well, in fairness to my parents, they didn't really have an opinion initially, and they didn't really have a choice either, because in 1949, when I was born, the surgical techniques that became available within 5 years or 6 years didn't exist. And I think the medical profession in those days thought the masculine gender was the bigger and better gender. So if you're going to have a disadvantaged child, it may as well have an advantage. I think it was as simple as that. I don't think there was anything ominous about it, and it certainly wasn't my parents' choice at that stage. I think once the die was cast, years down the line, things became a bit different, but
yes, well, like I said, I've known people with that same issue, being born with it, and it's a little, I don't know, I don't want to say confusing, but it does provide you with some angst in your life at the time. But let's move on, because you finally left Jamaica to go to New York to fashion school.
yes.
And I would love to see some of your creations, be honest with you. Do you have any drawings that you have from back then?
I do, but they're downstairs, and I'm on the second floor,
Well,
which
some of
would
it.
be the American third floor. So it would take too long to go and get them. But I
Another
do have
side.
some.
Oh, they must be amazing, because your style sense is exquisite, and what can I say?
Thank you.
Your choice of clothing, whenever I see pictures of you, is just amazing. And I think there's a Duchess in California that could take some lessons from you. That's for sure.
Yes, but she doesn't understand the rules of attire. First of all, make sure that things fit. Even if they don't suit you, they must fit. That's the first rule. Secondly, never wear anything that trails the ground in the front. It can trail the ground in the back. Thirdly, don't have things that are that bunch up. I mean, she breaks every single rule that any woman of elegance knows.
Uh, you said a mouthful there. Okay, so a big part of your autobiography deals with Colin Campbell, and your marriage to him only lasted 8 months.
No. It lasted 14 months.
14 months. Okay. 14
But
months.
the first bit was 9 months, then we were separated, then we got back together for 14 months in all.
Explain to the viewers how you met him. That's an interesting story.
Oh, I was staying with his sister. His sister Jeannie had a house in Jamaica. And I normally would stay with Sarah Spencer Churchill, who was her father at the time, was the Duke of Marlborough. Now it's her nephew who's the Duke. Her brother became the Duke in the interval. I normally stayed with Sarah, who also had a house in Jamaica. And Sarah had sold her house on East 72nd Street. So while her flat was being done up, I couldn't stay in her flat. So I stayed with Jeannie instead, Jeannie Campbell, and who had been married to Norman Mailer. And Jeannie was a great character, and she was actually a very nice person, very warm-hearted and kind. And anyway, she put me up, and Colin flew in unexpectedly en route to Paris to link up with his stepmother Matilda, of whom he was fond. And I think Jeannie orchestrated things. I think she thought she was doing both of us a favor, and she was romantic. And I have nothing against her for the misfiring of the gun. Let's put it that way.
Well, your marriage left a lot to be desired. You suffered so much beatings, torture. It was reading about how you had to play unconscious just so he'd stop. It just broke my heart. And I want to ask you, do you think he ever loved you in the way that we think of somebody really loving somebody else?
Well, funny you should say that. Sorry. A friend of mine who you might have heard of, Elaine Trebek Carries. She was married to Alex Trebek. She's an old friend of mine, and she was saying to me just the other day, actually, she said, oh, in the early days, Colin absolutely adored you. I said, oh, I don't think so. She said, oh, yes, she said, and she recounted a dinner party that actually Eddie and Corey had for us up at Blue Mountain Inn, which was the chic restaurant in Jamaica at the time. It was absolutely magical. And she said, oh, you should have seen the way he looked at you. He looked at you with pure pride and adoration. But she said pride. And he used to say, even after we were divorced, he used to say that when he met me, he thought I was the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen. Well, that, I have to say, had to be an exaggeration, because I still remember what I had on. I had on trousers and a brown turtleneck sweater from Orbax, woolen sweater from Orbax, and no makeup, no jewelry, no makeup, nothing. But anyway, so I think he, and I do think to the extent he was capable of love, he did love me. I think, in fairness to him, but I think he was very damaged. His mother was a drinking alcoholic, and I suspect he was born on the fetal alcohol spectrum. And he used to say, I can't help myself. I love you, but I hate all women, and you're a woman. I hated my mother. And so I think, one needs to try to be as fair as possible. But I don't think he would have ever considered marrying me if I hadn't come with baggage along the lines of money. you
Yes.
know.
Yeah, you mentioned that he was just he was interested in marrying you for wealth, beauty, and your social standing. So that says basically to me why he wanted to marry you, and in a
But
way,
you know,
kind of.
but you know, in fairness to him, uh, I mean, in those days, people didn't get married necessarily only for love. They thought they also had other factors brought into bear. And he used to say that his family always married beautiful women with money. And, you know, and I mean, David Koch, for instance, one of the things he liked about me was the fact that I was very socially adept. And, you know, that if if I had married him, I would have had to put him on the map socially. And indeed, he ended up being on the map very socially when he was married to Julia. But I mean, he had to pay good money for them to get on the map. He had to pay Sunshine Sacks. I mean, had I married him, he wouldn't have had to pay anybody. It would have just happened naturally. And I think my father, in part, married my mother and stayed with her because she was socially creditable. So I think, you know, in 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 fairness to him, I think there were genuine feelings, but they most likely were very tertiary, not even secondary. Well, with me, really, it was the man that I was marrying. And I have to tell you, the man that he presented himself as being was absolutely glorious. He was taller, darker, and more masculine than Roger Moore and looked a bit like Roger Moore. So at the time, he was drop dead gorgeous and had a very captivating personality. And I knew he had no money, but that didn't bother me, you know. Uh, I've never been that interested in money. If I'd been interested in money, I'd have made off with David. So,
You suffered so much with him though in the marriage, and I've known other women who have been abused as well, and yet you continually went back to try and save the marriage. Why? What is it about that situation that has women saying, oh, he'll change, but you keep saying leopards never change their spots?
no, I didn't continually go back. The first time it happened, he swore it was an aberration and it would never happen again. And I accepted it and believed it. The second time it happened, the first time it happened was in over the May bank holiday weekend, which was 6 weeks after we were married. And I accepted that it was an aberration. And I'd never been in a situation like that before. So, and I believe in giving people a chance. And, you know, it's the thing to do. The second time it happened was in New York in September. And then I realized it wasn't an aberration. And my father wanted me to leave him. And because Dick Barker, who was a friend of his mother's, put me on a plane to my sister in Canada. And my father spoke to my brother-in-law, who's a doctor and was also his great nephew. And, you know, when Ken described my injuries, my father got me on the phone and said, you've got to leave right now. I said, well, I'm not there. He said, well, you mustn't go back. I said, are you crazy? I said, of course I'm going back. I said, all my clothes are there. All my possessions are there. I'm not going back. And he said, well, you can't stay with a beast like that. And I said, well, I said, Daddy, I will leave if it happens again. And by then I realized it most likely would. I said, but I need to get my head around, because up to that point, my commitment was to make the marriage work. with all its insufficiencies and the difficulties, I was committed to making it work. And for me to just flip and decide, well, I'm leaving, I'm not like that. I'm more measured in major decisions. And I needed to get my head around, well, it's like a ship. It needs, you can't just immediately dodge something. It needs to, it's slowly. And so I went back and I said to him, I said, if you ever raise your hand to me again, this is the end of it. And in the November, and by then I realized there was a pattern, and I had been recommended to go to Al-Anon, which I had been going to. And I realized that there was a pattern. I used to say, oh, the hate Georgie campaign starts. Then after a few weeks, and then but you could actually see by then, the third time around, I saw a pattern. Well, and I told him before it escalated to that point where it would be complete physical abuse. I told him I wanted a divorce. And so that's really, but so I didn't keep on going back. I went back once, because I left once. So
now, when you went to Canada, was that the time when that your injury is described as the worst case of wife beating? Was that your brother-in-law that described that?
Yes, yeah, but he's a doctor.
Yes.
and he said it, yeah. But let's move on to something else.
Yes, let's do that.
Dreadful.
Yes, that very dark chapter in your life, obviously. You had so much happen to you, and you've been involved in so much. It's hard to know where to go next. But you went to work for some diplomats at the Libyan embassy, and oh my gosh, you've had so much happen to you. But that job at the embassy, how did you get that, and why did you take that at the time? Because Libya has never been a friend too much of the Western countries.
Well, funnily enough, Joe Fish, who was, they say, in charge of the CIA at the American embassy in London, he was someone I knew, and he is the one who told me to write to the ambassador. I said to him, I said, Joe, I really would like a job. He said, well, you are ideally suited to be an ambassador's private secretary, is how he put it. Or he said, or a social secretary. So he told me, and I've always wondered if it wasn't a bit of a setup without anybody saying anything to me. But anyway, he's told me, and I wrote, and I got a response, and I went in and I saw the ambassador, who had been Gaddafi's commanding officer and had not taken part in the coup. So he was thrown in prison for a year. Then he was, if I remember correctly, the story was that he was paid $1 million. This would have been in the mid-70s. Which was put in a bank account in Switzerland for him. And he was told, you can be released, you'll get some money. We need you to be an ambassador, because he was very good looking. He looked like Omar Sharif.
Oh.
And he was sort of the same. He would have been in his 30s at the time, I should think. And so he and the premier embassy was the court of St. James's, because there was no American embassy. Sorry. And so I went as I got the job as the social secretary. And then they realized that I was intelligent. So I then became the social secretary / private secretary. And then I had my own secretary. And it was very interesting. And I can tell you something, you know, people thought that the Gaddafi regime was not of something that I would have naturally gravitated towards, let's put it that way. But working with them, I mean, I used to speak to Colonel Jaloud practically every day, and he rarely ran the country. And occasionally with the colonel who was Gaddafi. But Gaddafi's nephew really ran the embassy. He was the head of the military section. His name was Saeed Gaddafi. And it was fascinating. And everybody of consequence used to traipse through the embassy. You know, I mean, Jimmy Goldsmith was always there. So, you know, people wanted to do business. And I'll tell you, say what you will about Gaddafi, he was not a theocrat, number one. And number two, every single Libyan who had a health problem was shipped over to England, and they were taken to the finest doctors and put up in the finest hospitals. I know because I used to help to organize things. And so, but then, of course, it was a very rich country with a very small population. But he certainly was taking care of his people. And as long as they agreed with him, everything was fine. And the biggest mistake that Hillary Clinton and the American government made was deciding they were going to topple him, because that has, the Libyan people will never forgive Hillary Clinton for that, because bad as things were under Gaddafi, they were infinitely worse and have remained infinitely worse since.
Okay.
And incidentally, for what it's worth, I also knew members of the royal family of Libya. So I saw it from both sides.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Another story that I want you to delve into a little bit. We are somewhat running out of time. This is going by so quickly. But you almost became an Arab queen. That's an amazing story. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes. I mean, I've never been 100% sure that Eli wasn't playing me. Eli Wallet was one of the founders of iOS with Bernie Kornfeld. And I don't know if you remember iOS and Bernie Kornfeld. And it was in the 60s, a huge company. And then in the 70s, well, Eli shoved out Bernie, and then Eli was shoved out by, I can't remember his name now, and he made off with several $100 million and ended up as really almost a prisoner in Cuba, and he fell foul of Castro. But I can't remember his name. It's a very famous. But anyway, Eli, I knew Bernie separately, and I knew Eli separately. And they hated each other because Eli had toppled Bernie from his throne. And Eli fancied me and had fancied me for years. And anyway, I had no interest in him and used to tell him I had none. But he liked me as a person as well. And I think he also found me interesting. And he also liked socially connected people. Let's be blunt. And he asked me once if I knew any, because one of his friends, who was, he said, this Middle Eastern king wanted a Western style queen. And he said, think about it, which I did. And I said, I don't think I can think of anybody. And he said, well, what about you? And I said, me? I said, Eli, are you nuts, sort of thing? I said, you know, with my upbringing, after the things that have been written about me, I said, he said, oh, no, no, no. He said, nobody will ever dare say anything about you ever again. Anyway, he tried to talk me into it. And you see, at the time also, my father's uncle was the Archbishop of Beirut, and he had allied the Maronites and the Phalangists with Israel. And of course, if I was going to be the queen of a Middle Eastern state, the fact that I shared a maiden name with somebody who in the Muslim world was regarded with horror would have been a big plus politically. But I also thought, hang on a second, suppose I'm falling into a trap, because Lorraine Dillon, who had been married to Bernie, she had a friend who it was one of John Bentley's girlfriends. John Bentley was a great figure at the time financially, and she made off with this Saudi Arabian sheikh or prince or whoever it was, and she was in Saudi Arabia, and the wife turned her into the police, and she was stoned to death. And so I thought, I don't think I want to get involved. Could I be walking into trap? But also, I wanted love. I wanted love, and I wanted to at least meet him first. And Eli was saying, no, you have to make up your mind, and blah blah blah. The whole thing was crazy, but
it makes an interesting story to your life.
Well, yeah, but to what extent can we rely upon Eli's machinations is the question I now ask myself.
Well, there's so much more to talk about, and we will have you back, because I really wanted to talk about your beautiful sons and your adoption process, and a lot of the people that you've known through your life. I know in your YouTube channel, you talk a little bit about Onassis and other people, and we'll get into that next time. But for now, I want to encourage people. This is an amazing book, A Life Worth Living. That's your autobiography. It's amazing. But actually your first book was, what's the name of that first book? The Guide to Being a Modern Lady was written in 1986. I tried to find that. You can get it now for about $200 or more if you search the web. So it's something on my to-do list eventually. But right now, thank you so much for joining us. And for the viewers, Lady C will definitely come back. She has so much more to talk about. She's amazing. So I will see you next time. Thanks for watching, and take care.
Thank you.
With over 30 years of experience in real estate and the mortgage industry, Darlene Mays provides knowledge and expert guidance to clients looking to buy or sell a home. Serving clients throughout South Orange County, Darlene specializes in the senior community of Laguna Woods Village. Darlene works with her clients to ensure the highest level of service, from the beginning of the process right down to the closing table. If you are looking to buy or sell, who you work with really does matter. Call Darlene Mays today.